The thunder rolled across the Texas plains like cannon fire, each rumble shaking the small wooden cabin where Sarah Mitchell pressed herself against the rough-hewn door. Through the single window she could see her husband-to-be, Jacob Thornton, stumbling toward the house, his heavy boots splashing through the mud as lightning illuminated his rage-twisted face. "Sarah, open this door right now!" His fist pounded against the wood, making her flinch with each blow. "You can't hide from me forever, girl." She bit her lip until she tasted blood, her trembling fingers gripping the iron latch. 3 months of marriage to this man had taught her that his anger was like wildfire, unpredictable and consuming. Tonight, she'd finally refused his demands, and the bruise on her cheek still throbbed from his response. The wind howled through the gaps in the cabin walls, carrying the scent of rain and something else. Freedom, perhaps. Sarah had grown up on stories of the frontier, where brave souls carved out new lives from nothing. But her reality had become a prison of silent meals, whispered prayers, and hidden tears. "I know you're in there," Jacob's voice cracked like a whip. "My property doesn't run from me." Property. The word hit her like a physical blow. That's all she was to him, something owned, controlled, used. She closed her eyes and thought of her mother's last words before the fever took her. "Sometimes, darling, the only way forward is through the storm." Another flash of lightning revealed Jacob fumbling with something at his belt. Sarah's heart lurched when she saw the glint of metal, his hunting knife. She'd seen him gut deer with that blade, his movements precise and cold. The back window. It was small, barely large enough for her slight frame, but it led to the creek that ran behind their property. If she could reach the water during this storm, the rain might wash away her tracks. Moving as quietly as possible, Sarah gathered her few precious belongings, her mother's silver locket, the worn Bible that had belonged to her grandmother, and the $23 she'd hidden in the flour tin, money she'd earned secretly by mending clothes for other settlers. She wrapped everything in her thickest shawl and tied it around her waist. The pounding on the front door grew more violent. "Sarah Elizabeth Thornton, you will open this door or I'll break it down." She winced at hearing her married name. She'd never felt like a Thornton, never would. Pushing open the back window, she felt the storm's fury immediately, rain lashing her face like tiny needles, wind trying to push her back inside. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, then squeezed through the opening. The drop to the ground jolted her knees, but she pushed through the pain. Behind her she heard the front door splinter. Jacob's roar of fury mixed with the thunder, spurring her forward into the darkness. The creek was swollen from the rain, its normally gentle current now a churning torrent. Sarah hesitated at the bank, knowing that entering this water could mean death. But staying meant a different kind of death, a slow withering of her spirit, until nothing remained of the girl who once dreamed of seeing the world beyond these harsh plains. "I choose the storm," she said aloud, then stepped into the rushing water. The current seized her immediately, pulling her downstream faster than she'd anticipated. The cold water soaked through her dress, making it heavy and cumbersome. She fought to keep her head above the surface, using every swimming lesson her brother had taught her before he died in the war. Lightning illuminated the landscape in stark black and white, twisted mesquite trees, rolling hills dotted with sagebrush, and ahead the dark ribbon of the Brazos River, where this creek would eventually lead. Each flash revealed her progress, taking her farther from Jacob's reach with every passing moment. A fallen log nearly knocked her unconscious as she struggled to navigate the rushing water. Sarah grabbed hold of it, using it as support while she caught her breath. The rain continued to pour, washing the tears from her cheeks until she couldn't tell where sorrow ended and storm began. In the distance, she could hear Jacob's voice calling her name, but it was growing fainter. Soon, even his fury couldn't compete with the storm's power. For the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself to hope. She didn't know what lay ahead in the vast Texas wilderness. She'd heard stories of Apache raids, cattle rustlers, and wild animals that could tear a person apart. But as she clung to that log, letting the storm carry her toward an uncertain future, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her wedding day. The possibility of choice. The creek curved sharply ahead, and Sarah could see where it widened to join the Brazos. There she would have to make her first real decision as a free woman. Which direction to go, how to survive, and whether she had the courage to build a life from nothing but determination and hope. Chapter 2. Where waters meet dawn broke grey and reluctant over the Brazos River, revealing a landscape that seemed carved from raw determination and endless sky. Sarah had managed to reach the riverbank, just as exhaustion threatened to pull her under, dragging herself onto a narrow strip of sand between twisted cottonwoods. Her dress hung heavy and torn, her hair a tangled mess of river weeds and mud, but she was alive and she was free. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and strangely quiet. Sarah wrung out her shawl and checked her belongings. Everything was soaked but intact. The $23 had survived, along with her mother's locket and the family Bible. Small mercies in a vast, unforgiving land. Her stomach cramped with hunger, reminding her that freedom came with practical challenges. She'd never had to find her own food, never slept under open sky, never been truly alone in the wilderness. Jacob had controlled every aspect of her daily life, from what she ate to when she spoke. Now sitting on this riverbank as the sun climbed higher, she realized she was as unprepared for survival as a newborn calf. The sound of horses approaching made her freeze. Through the cottonwoods, she could see dust rising in the distance, too much dust for one or two riders. Her heart hammered as she considered her options: hide and hope they passed by, or reveal herself and pray they weren't worse than what she'd escaped from. The decision was made for her when a voice called out, clear and commanding, "Easy now, boys, we've got fresh tracks here." Sarah pressed herself against the trunk of the largest cottonwood, peering through the branches. 5 men on horseback had stopped near where the creek met the river. Even from a distance, she could see they weren't ordinary settlers. Their clothes were too fine, their horses too well-bred, their bearing too confident. "Tracks go right into the water," one of them said, dismounting to examine the muddy bank. Whoever it was, they knew what they were doing. The leader, a tall man with silver hair beneath his hat, studied the river with calculating eyes. Or they were desperate enough not to care about the risk. Either way, they're long gone by now. Sarah held her breath as the men discussed their next move. From their conversation, she gathered they were tracking someone, but not her. They spoke of stolen cattle and a missing ranch hand, concerns that seemed to belong to a different world entirely. "We should head upstream," the silver-haired man decided. "Check the Morrison place. If someone's rustling cattle, that's where they'd cross." As the riders prepared to leave, Sarah caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. One of the horses bore a familiar brand, the double T mark of the Thornton Ranch. Jacob had sent men after her. But these weren't Jacob's usual companions. These men carried themselves like professionals, and their leader spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to command. Hired trackers, perhaps, or bounty hunters brought in to find his stolen property. Sarah waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded before emerging from her hiding place. The encounter had shaken her, but it also brought clarity. She couldn't simply wander the frontier hoping for the best. She needed a destination, a plan, and most importantly, she needed to understand this land well enough to disappear into it. Following the river seemed her best option. The Brazos flowed southeast toward the Gulf of Mexico, passing through settlements where a woman might find work and a new identity. But between here and there lay hundreds of miles of frontier territory, much of it contested between settlers, the U.S. Army, and the Comanche Nation. The thought of the Comanche sent a chill through her. Every settler knew the stories, raids that came like lightning, leaving nothing but death and destruction behind. But Sarah had also heard other stories, whispered tales of traders who dealt peacefully with the tribes, of mutual respect earned through understanding rather than fear. She began walking along the riverbank, keeping to the shade where possible. The Texas sun was already fierce despite the early hour, and her wet clothes provided little protection. Each step took her farther from everything she'd known, but also deeper into uncertainty. Around midday, exhaustion forced her to rest beneath a cluster of mesquite trees. The landscape here was different from the settled areas she knew, wilder, more alive somehow. Prairie grass stretched to the horizon, broken by occasional groves of post oak and elm. Hawks circled overhead, riding thermals with effortless grace. It was beautiful in its harsh way, but beauty wouldn't fill her empty stomach or provide shelter when night fell. Sarah had to think practically, use the skills her mother had taught her, before society dictated that such knowledge was unladylike. She remembered stories of frontier women who'd survived impossible circumstances through wit and determination. Women like her mother's sister, Aunt Clara, who'd built a trading post with nothing but courage, and the ability to see opportunity where others saw only hardship. The sound of gunfire in the distance interrupted her thoughts. Sharp, rapid cracks that echoed across the plains. Too many shots for hunting, too organized for a casual conflict. Sarah's frontier-raised instincts kicked in, and she moved quickly toward higher ground to assess the situation. From a low hill overlooking the river valley, she could see smoke rising from what appeared to be a small settlement several miles downstream. Even at this distance, she could make out the tiny figures of riders moving between buildings and the dark shapes that could only be bodies lying motionless in the dirt. A raid. The very thing every frontier family feared most was happening right before her eyes, and she was helpless to do anything but watch. But as she studied the scene more carefully, Sarah began to notice details that didn't fit the stories she'd heard. The riders moved with purpose, but not the wild abandon she'd expected. They seemed to be searching for something specific, rather than simply destroying everything in sight. And then, impossibly, one of the riders turned in her direction, as if sensing her presence across all that distance. Even through the shimmering heat, she could see him clearly. Tall, powerful, sitting his horse with the natural grace of someone born to the saddle. Their eyes met across the vast Texas morning, and Sarah felt something shift in the very foundations of her world. Chapter 3. The Chief's Recognition. The rider who had spotted Sarah kicked his horse into motion, leaving the settlement behind as he rode directly toward her position. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs felt rooted to the earth as she watched him approach. Within minutes she could make out details that made her breath catch in her throat. He was Comanche. There was no mistaking the distinctive way he sat his horse, the traditional weapons at his side, or the intricate beadwork on his leather vest. But what struck her most was his bearing. This wasn't a young warrior seeking glory in battle. This was a leader, someone who commanded respect through presence rather than violence. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her mother's locket, a habit she'd developed during times of stress. As the warrior drew closer, she could see his face clearly. Strong features marked by intelligence, and something that looked almost like curiosity rather than hostility. He stopped his horse 20 feet away, studying her with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her torn dress, her muddy appearance, the way she stood her ground despite obvious fear. When he spoke, his English was clear and precise, though accented with the musical quality of his native tongue. "You are far from your people," he said, his voice carrying easily across the distance between them, "and you smell of river water and desperation." Sarah lifted her chin, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "You're far from yours as well." A ghost of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "This is my land, white woman. I am never far from my people here." He paused, tilting his head slightly. "But you run from something, or someone." The accuracy of his observation unsettled her. "That's none of your concern." "Perhaps not." He dismounted with fluid grace, though he made no move to approach closer. "I am called Running Wolf by your people. My true name is longer and would be difficult for your tongue." His eyes studied the settlement in the distance where smoke still rose. "Tell me, what do you see when you look there?" Sarah followed his gaze, confused by the question. "I see destruction, death." "Do you?" Running Wolf's voice held genuine curiosity. "Look more carefully. What you call destruction, we call reclaiming. Those buildings were built on the bones of our villages. That well was dug where our children once played." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd never considered the history beneath the settlements, never questioned what had been there before white families claimed the land. The realization made her stomach turn. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Few of your people do. They see only what they choose to see." He studied her reaction carefully. "But you hear my words differently." "Why?" Sarah thought of Jacob's hands on her, claiming ownership as if she were livestock. The parallel was uncomfortable, but undeniable. "Because I know what it feels like to have something taken from you." Running Wolf nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. "The man you run from, he claimed you as property." The question was so direct, so perceptive, that Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Among my people," Running Wolf said quietly, "a woman chooses her path. A man who takes a woman against her will is considered worse than a coward. He is broken inside." He gestured toward the settlement. "Today we took back horses that were stolen from us, horses that belonged to my brother's son, before he was killed by your soldiers. Sarah's worldview tilted on its axis. Everything she'd been taught about civilization and savagery suddenly seemed questionable. The people in that settlement, are they alive? Frightened, but alive. We are not the monsters your newspapers make us out to be. His expression hardened slightly. Though we can be when circumstances require it. A distant shout echoed across the plains, and Running Wolf's head turned sharply. Other riders were approaching. His warriors, Sarah realized, coming to find their chief. The moment of strange intimacy between them was about to shatter. You have a choice to make, white woman, Running Wolf said, remounting his horse with easy grace. You can continue running blindly through country you don't understand, or you can learn to see this land as it truly is. What do you mean? There is a trading post 2 days' ride south along the river. The woman who runs it is called Iron Mary by the whites, though that is not her true name either. She trades fairly with all peoples and asks no questions about a person's past. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Tell her that Running Wolf says you have eyes that can learn to see. She will understand. The approaching riders were close enough now that Sarah could make out individual faces, hard, weathered men who looked at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. Running Wolf spoke to them rapidly in Comanche, his tone commanding. Whatever he said caused them to relax slightly, though they continued to watch her warily. Why are you helping me? Sarah asked, the question tumbling out before she could stop it. Running Wolf's dark eyes met hers one final time. Because you did not scream when you saw me. Because you answered my questions with honesty instead of the lies your people usually tell. And because so he hesitated, then continued, because I have daughters, and I would hope that if they were ever alone and frightened in a strange land, someone would show them kindness. With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode back toward his warriors. Sarah watched them disappear into the heat shimmer of the afternoon, leaving her alone with thoughts that challenged everything she'd believed about good and evil, civilization and savagery. The trading post, 2 days south along the river. It was the first concrete destination she'd had since fleeing Jacob's cabin, and it came from the most unlikely source imaginable. As she resumed walking, Sarah found herself thinking not about the danger she'd just faced, but about Running Wolf's words regarding choice and recognition. For the first time since her escape, she felt like she was walking towards something, rather than just away from her past. Chapter 4. The Path to Iron Mary. The second day of walking nearly broke Sarah's resolve. Her feet, soft from a lifetime of wearing proper shoes on wooden floors, were blistered and bleeding inside her ruined boots. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly, and her water supply, refilled from the river each morning, never seemed adequate for the brutal heat. But worse than the physical discomfort was the constant awareness of being watched. Throughout the morning, she'd caught glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision, riders keeping pace with her progress, always just beyond clear sight. Whether they were Running Wolf's warriors, Jacob's trackers, or other dangers entirely, she couldn't tell. By midday, when the heat became unbearable, Sarah sought shelter beneath a cluster of cottonwoods near the river. Her reflection in the slow-moving water showed a woman she barely recognized, sunburned, hollow-eyed, her once neat brown hair hanging in tangles. 3 days ago, she'd been Jacob Thornton's wife, defined entirely by that relationship. Now she was simply Sarah, a woman trying to survive in a land that demanded strength she wasn't sure she possessed. The sound of approaching horses made her freeze, but these riders made no attempt at concealment. 3 men emerged from the heat shimmer, their horses picking their way carefully down the riverbank. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the silver-haired leader from the group she'd seen 2 days earlier. Well, well, the man said, dismounting with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. Mrs. Sarah Thornton, I presume. Sarah stood slowly, her hand moving instinctively to her mother's locket. I'm not sure what you mean. The man smiled, but it held no warmth. Ma'am, I'm Thomas Kellerman, and I've been hired by your husband to bring you home safely. Now, I'm sure you're tired and frightened, but this foolishness has gone on long enough. I'm not going back. The words came out stronger than Sarah felt. Kellerman's expression hardened. Mrs. Thornton, you seem to be laboring under some misunderstanding about your situation. You're a married woman who has abandoned her home and her duties. Your husband is within his legal rights to reclaim his property. There was that word again. Property. Sarah felt anger kindle in her chest, burning away some of her fear. I'm not anyone's property. The law says different, ma'am. One of Kellerman's companions, a younger man with cruel eyes, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. And we're here to enforce that law. Gently, of course, Kellerman added, though his tone suggested otherwise. Mr. Thornton was very specific about wanting you returned unharmed. He's concerned about your well-being. Sarah thought of the bruises on her arms, the split lip from their last argument, the way Jacob's hands felt like manacles around her wrists. His concern has a strange way of showing itself. Now, that's between you and your husband, Kellerman said dismissively. What happens in a marriage isn't any of our business. Our business is bringing you home. The third man, who had remained silent until now, pointed toward the horizon. Boss, we got company. Sarah followed his gaze and felt her heart skip. A line of riders was approaching from the north, 6 mounted figures moving with purpose across the plains. Even at a distance, she could see they weren't settlers. Comanche, the younger man breathed, his hand moving to his weapon. Kellerman's demeanor changed instantly, his casual arrogance replaced by cold professionalism. How many rounds do we have? Not enough if they mean business, came the grim reply. As the riders drew closer, Sarah recognized the lead figure, Running Wolf, sitting his horse with the same calm authority she remembered. But now she could see him as Kellerman and his men did, a dangerous enemy in hostile territory. Ma'am, Kellerman said quietly, I suggest you get behind us. Whatever differences we might have, we're all white folks here. But Sarah found herself stepping forward instead of back. Something in Running Wolf's bearing told her this wasn't a coincidence. He'd been watching, waiting for exactly this moment. The Comanche riders stopped just out of rifle range, forming a loose line across the plains. Running Wolf rode forward alone, stopping near enough to speak, but far enough to avoid immediate danger. I see you have found the lost woman, he called out, his English carrying clearly in the still air. This is none of your concern, Indian, Kellerman replied, though Sarah could hear the tension in his voice. This is a family matter. Running Wolf's eyes found Sarah's across the distance. The woman does not look like family to these men. She looks like prey. Now see here, Kellerman began, but Running Wolf cut him off with a gesture. I have a proposition, the chief said. The woman chooses. If she wishes to go with you, my warriors and I will ride away. If she chooses differently... He let the implication hang in the air. Kellerman's face flushed red. You can't be serious. She's a married woman, bound by law and Christian duty. Your laws, Running Wolf interrupted. Your duties. What does she choose? All eyes turned to Sarah, and she felt the weight of the moment crushing down on her. This was more than just escaping Jacob. This was choosing between 2 completely different ways of seeing the world. Kellerman sensed her hesitation and pressed his advantage. Mrs. Thornton, think about what you're doing. These are savages. They'll use you for their pleasure and then trade you to other tribes. Is that really preferable to going home to your lawful husband? Home, Sarah repeated softly. The word felt foreign on her tongue. She thought of Jacob's house, the silence, the fear, the slow death of everything she'd once been. Then she thought of Running Wolf's words about choice, about women who determined their own paths. My name, she said, her voice growing stronger, is Sarah Mitchell, and I choose to continue south. The effect was immediate. Kellerman's hand moved toward his gun, but Running Wolf's warriors responded instantly, raising their weapons in a fluid, practiced motion that spoke of years of coordinated action. You're making a terrible mistake, Kellerman said through gritted teeth. Perhaps, Sarah replied, but it's my mistake to make. Running Wolf nodded approvingly. Wisdom often looks like foolishness to those who have forgotten how to choose. He turned his attention back to Kellerman. You will ride north. You will not follow this woman again. If I see you in my territory after today, we will speak with weapons instead of words. For a moment, the tableau held. 6 Comanche warriors facing 3 bounty hunters across a few yards of Texas prairie, with Sarah standing between 2 worlds that could never truly understand each other. Then Kellerman spat in the dirt and mounted his horse. This isn't over, Mrs. Thornton. Your husband has legal rights, and he'll exercise them. Tell Jacob, Sarah said quietly, that his wife died in the river. Sarah Mitchell will make her own way. As Kellerman and his men rode north, Running Wolf approached Sarah one final time. The trading post is half a day's ride ahead. Iron Mary will be expecting you. He paused, studying her face. You have courage, white woman. Use it wisely. With that, He and his warriors melted back into the landscape, leaving Sarah alone once again, but somehow less alone than she'd felt in years. Chapter 5. Iron Mary's Sanctuary. The trading post emerged from the heat shimmer like a mirage made real, a collection of adobe buildings clustered around a central courtyard with corrals extending toward the river. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and Sarah could see people moving between the structures with the purposeful efficiency of a well-run operation. As she approached the main gate, exhaustion finally caught up with her. 3 days of walking in the Texas heat, surviving on river water, and the few edible plants she remembered from childhood had pushed her body beyond its limits. Her legs trembled with each step, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. "Easy there, honey," a voice called out as Sarah stumbled. Strong hands caught her before she could fall, and she found herself looking up into the weathered face of a woman unlike any she'd ever seen. Iron Mary stood nearly 6 feet tall, with silver-streaked hair braided down her back and arms that showed the kind of strength that came from years of hard work. Her skin was deeply tanned, and her clothes were a practical mixture of frontier leather and Mexican cotton, but it was her eyes that caught Sarah's attention. Sharp, intelligent, and utterly fearless. "Let me guess," Mary said, supporting Sarah toward the main building. "Running Wolf sent you my way." Sarah nodded weakly, too exhausted for surprise at how quickly the woman had understood the situation. "Figured as much. That man has a talent for finding strays who need a new start." Mary helped Sarah into a chair in what appeared to be a combination store, saloon, and meeting hall. "Maria, bring water and some of that soup you've been simmering." A young Mexican woman hurried over with a tin cup and a steaming bowl. The soup was simple, beans, corn, and meat in a rich broth, but it tasted like the finest meal Sarah had ever eaten. "Now then," Mary said, settling into a chair across from her, "suppose you tell me your story. And before you start spinning tales, know that I've heard every sob story and hard luck case that ever crossed this frontier. I deal in truth here, nothing else." Something in the woman's direct manner made Sarah abandon any thought of deception. She told her story simply and honestly. The arranged marriage, Jacob's violence, her escape through the storm, and her encounter with Running Wolf. Mary listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing. "Well," Mary said when Sarah finished, "sounds like you've had yourself quite an education in how the world really works." She stood and moved to a cabinet, returning with a ledger book. "Question is, what do you plan to do with that education?" "I don't understand." "Honey, every person who comes through that gate is running from something or towards something. Most don't know which. You've got the look of someone who's figured out she's running towards something, even if she doesn't know what it is yet." Mary opened the ledger. "I can offer you work, good work, honest work, but it won't be easy, and it sure won't be what society says a proper lady should be doing." Sarah looked around the trading post with new eyes. She could see now that this wasn't just a business. It was a haven. The people she'd glimpsed moving between buildings included white settlers, Mexican traders, and even a few Native Americans, all conducting business with the easy familiarity of long association. "What kind of work?" Sarah asked. "Everything," Mary replied bluntly. "Cooking, cleaning, keeping books, learning languages, handling trade negotiations. Sometimes doctoring, sometimes defending this place when folks get ideas about taking what we've built." She fixed Sarah with a piercing stare. "But mostly, you'd be learning to see this country the way it really is, not the way the newspapers back east say it should be." "I'm not sure I understand what you mean." Mary gestured toward the window, where the evening sun was painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. "Out here, survival depends on understanding that there are no pure villains or heroes. Running Wolf and his people aren't the savages the papers make them out to be. They're fighting for their children's future, same as everyone else. The settlers aren't all righteous pioneers. Some are good folks trying to build something. Others are running from crimes back home." She closed the ledger with a snap. "What matters is whether you can deal fairly with all kinds of people, whether you can judge individuals by their actions instead of their skin color or their politics. Can you do that?" Sarah thought of Running Wolf's unexpected kindness, of his words about choice and recognition. Then she thought of Jacob's brutality hidden behind a facade of Christian respectability. The contrast was stark and telling. "I think I'm learning to," she said quietly. "Good answer." Mary stood and extended her hand. "Sarah Mitchell, welcome to Iron Mary's trading post. Your new life starts now." As Sarah shook the offered hand, she felt something settle into place inside her chest. Not quite peace, but the possibility of peace. Through the window, she could see the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and for the first time since her escape, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. "One more thing," Mary said, moving toward the door. "Running Wolf mentioned you might be getting some unwelcome visitors eventually. That husband of yours sounds like the type who doesn't give up easy." Sarah's newfound calm wavered slightly. "What do we do if he comes?" Mary's smile was sharp as a blade. "Honey, this trading post has survived Apache raids, cattle rustlers and cavalry units that thought they could requisition whatever they wanted. One angry man with delusions about owning another human being?" She shrugged. "That's just Tuesday around here." As if summoned by her words, a figure appeared in the doorway, a tall man with prematurely gray hair and hands that bore the calluses of hard work. Sarah tensed until she saw Mary's face light up with genuine affection. "Sarah, meet my partner, Jim Crawford. Jim, this is Sarah Mitchell, our newest resident." Jim touched his hat brim politely. "Ma'am, Mary told me we might be expecting company soon. Don't you worry. We've got ways of discouraging folks who overstay their welcome. Legal ways, mostly," Mary added with a grin that suggested the mostly was important. That night, Sarah lay on a real bed for the first time in days, listening to the sounds of the trading post settling into evening quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, and the river murmured its ancient song against the banks. She thought about Jacob, probably still searching for her, still believing she was his property to reclaim. She thought about Kellerman and his men, perhaps planning another attempt to collect their bounty. She thought about the vast Texas frontier stretching endlessly in all directions, full of dangers she couldn't even imagine. But mostly, she thought about Running Wolf's words. A woman chooses her path. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah Mitchell had chosen. Not the safe path, not the expected path, but her own path. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as herself. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's property, but as a woman who had learned that sometimes the only way forward was through the storm. Outside her window, the prairie wind carried the scent of sage and possibility, and Sarah smiled as she drifted off to sleep, finally at peace with her choice to embrace the unknown rather than accept the unacceptable. The frontier had tested her and found her worthy. Now it was time to see what she could build from the ashes of her old life, in a land where courage mattered more than convention, and where a woman's worth was measured by her actions rather than her obedience.